continuing the division of Eretz Yisrael among the tribes. And Perek Tesvav, we had a very, very detailed description of the boundary of Yehuda that took over essentially the entire southern region of Eretz Yisrael. The next tribe that got its chelek were the two tribes of Yosef. They're called Bnei Yosef, and this will include Ephraim and Menashe. It's important to remember the following: Ephraim and Menashe. So first of all, Menashe got part of its portion east of the Jordan, and that was already in the days of Moshe Rabbeinu. But now we have the whole tribe of Ephraim, and half of the tribe of Menashe are getting their chalakim in the west, and they are north of Yehuda, but they are not adjacent to Yehuda. We're going to see later, although we're not told about this now, that Shevet Binyamin is going to be between Yehuda and Ephraim, and after Ephraim, north of Ephraim, is Menashe. So the way it goes so far is, going from south to north, you have Yehuda, you have Binyamin, you have Ephraim, you have Menashe, and then we'll talk about the other tribes. But right now, we're only going to discuss Shevet Ephraim, which is north of Yehuda, but not directly, because you have Binyamin in between. But we're not going to discuss Shevet Binyamin until Perek Yud Ches. And the pasuk says, "Vayetze hagayral lifnei Yosef." The allotment was then given to the sons of Yosef, Ephraim and Menashe, miyardein Yerecho, limei Yerecho mizracha. So again, if you think about it this way, Yehuda's boundary started, the northern boundary, at the tip of the Dead Sea, but then go a little north of that to Yericho, and Yericho is where you have the boundary of Bnei Ephraim, the southern boundary. So between the Dead Sea and Yericho, that's going to be the thickness of the allotment of Binyamin, which we'll get to later. And we start Miyardein L'Rechel and Merech Mizracha. We're starting east and moving west. Hamidbar Oila Miyerichai Bahor Beisel. Right, so the boundary passes through Yericho. So Yericho is now within the tribe of Ephraim, going up the mountains of Beisel. V'yatzmi Beisel Luza V'yavar El Agvul Hoarki Atarot, and it passes through the boundary of a nation, the Arki, who are not one of the seven nations, but apparently they were living in Canaan, through a town called Atarot. Vayarad Yama El Gavul Hayafleti, and it passes through the boundary of another nation called the Yafleti, again, not one of the seven nations, Ad Gavul Beis Charon Tachton, and it passes through the boundary of lower Beis Charon, Ad Gazer, Vayu Totzosav Yama, and that will take you, this is the southern boundary of Ephraim, and that will go all the way to the Mediterranean coast. And this is the southern boundary of Bnei Yosef, Ephraim, Menashe. But now, specifically, we'll now discuss Ephraim, which is the southern half of that, and then Menashe, which is the northern half. Vayin chalu Bnei Yosef, Menashe v'Ephraim. That the chalakim that belonged to the Bnei Yosef were given to the two sons, Menashe and Ephraim. And now we're first going to discuss the Ephraim boundary, because that is the southern half, that is the closest to Yehuda. So we're moving from south to north. Vayehi gevol Bnei Ephraim l'mishbechosam. The boundary of Bnei Ephraim, we gave you the southern boundary from Yericho to the Mediterranean, to the Amagadol. Vayehi gavul nachalatam mizracha, atros adar ad beis choron elyon. So essentially, again, we don't know where all these places are. The southern boundary is Yericho. The northern boundary starts at Atros, which is apparently north of Yericho, and it goes until upper Beis Choron. V'yatza hagvul hayama hamichmeses mitzafon. It then goes north. Again, it's traveling west. The northern boundary is traveling west, but then it goes north of the town of Michmesas. So Michmesas is included in the Gvul. V'nasav hagvul mizracha tanat Shiloh. And then the boundary turns in an eastern direction, meaning it's going west, but then it goes backwards. It goes east, so to speak. It goes backwards past Tanat Shiloh, so that remains outside of the boundary. V'yavar also mimizrach Yanocha, and it goes by east of Yanocha, which essentially is a complicated way of saying that Tanat Shiloh and Yanocha are not within the boundary, but then it continues. Then after it rounds those areas, it then goes back north and continues west. V'yarad miyanocha tarot, v'narasa upaga b'yerichai v'yatza hayarden. In other words, after it hits the sea, it then turns back and goes back all the way to Yericho. Mitapuach yelech hagvul yama. Yeah, again, these psukim are sometimes a little difficult to figure out. I'm having a little problem picturing it here because, again, we're going east-west. Yama hamichmasa mitzafon. Yeah, we are going west. So we went north of Michmas. It then turned back east to exclude Tanat Shiloh and Yanocha. Then the border went back north to link up with Atarot. And then it turned and making kind of a circle back to Yericho and hitting the Yarden. And mitapuach yelech hagvul yama. Again, this is from a different point. From Tapuach, it continued to go west. Nachal Koneh, vayu totzav hayama, and the boundary ultimately hit the Mediterranean. Zos nachalas mata b'nei Ephraim u'mishpachosam. Again, the point to remember is it is north of the chelik of Yehuda, but there is Shevet Binyamin between them. Now here it mentions another interesting point. He'orim hamivdalot lifnei Ephraim betoch nachalas b'nei Menashe kol he'orim v'chatzreihem. So for reasons that are not clear, although Menashe is north of Ephraim, Ephraim was given, in addition to its own territory, which is south of Menashe, they were given separate cities within Menashe's territory where they could inhabit, kind of like West Berlin in the middle of East Germany in the olden days. So the concept would be Ephraim had its own chelik, and Ephraim had what was called Orim HaMivdalot. And part of the reason is because just as there were parts of Yehuda where they could not dispossess the Yevusi, there were parts of Shevet Ephraim that they could not dispossess. In Yoshua's time, V'lo harishu es haKanani hayeshe bagazer, the Bnei Ephraim were not able to dispossess the Canaanites who lived in Gazer. Vayeshev haKanani bekerev Ephraim ad hayom hazeh, and the Canaanites lived in those cities, and eventually they did surrender and pay taxes, but in the time of Yehoshua, they were not able to be conquered at all. So it could be that the Hemshech of the Psukim is suggesting that Ephraim were given certain towns in the Chelik of Menashe because there were towns in the Chelik of Ephraim, particularly Gezer, that they were not able to conquer. Now, again, let me just remind you, I've mentioned this more than once, that this idea that eventually the Canaanites surrendered and paid taxes, is that halachically proper or is that not halachically proper? According to the Rambam, this is actually proper. Because according to the Rambam, even the 7 nations who inhabited Canaan, if they accept Jewish sovereignty and they accept the 7 mitzvos and they agree to be subservient and pay taxes, we are allowed to let them live in Eretz Yisrael. So, Vayihi Lamas Oved, according to the Rambam, is entirely halachically proper because this is nichlal in the mitzvah of Kriyat Shalom. On the other hand, according to Rashi's Shita throughout Shas, this is very, very shver. Because Rashi's Shita is that although the Canaanites are given an opportunity to run away before the Jewish people enter Eretz Yisrael, once they enter Eretz Yisrael, there's a mitzvah, lo sechaya kol neshama, we cannot let them live. We have to eradicate them, even if they want to make shalom. So mimanavshach, if there were times we couldn't do anything, all right, we couldn't do anything. But to say that we conquered them and they became avodim that paid mas, according to Rashi, that would not be halachically permissible, because according to Rashi, there is no kriyat shalom for the 7 nations of Canaan once we cross the Yarden. So the idea of the Canaanim in Devir paying mas of, the Canaanim in Gezer paying mas oved ad hayom hazeh, according to Rashi, is a tzorechiyun. According to the Rambam, it fits very well. So this is the end of Perek Tesayin. This is the Gavul of Bnei Ephraim.